Welcome back, Mr. Schulte here with another screencast. Today we're going to take a look at imperialism and America. Starting off, I want to remind you of the term imperialism, what it means. We see the policy of extending a nation's authority over countries by economic, political, and military means. Now, at the time, as we're turning in at the end of the century here, moving into the 1900s, this is going to be America expanding out beyond the continental United States and trying to gain control of various places around the globe. Our factors that are going to be pushing for this imperialism and this expansion are going to be desire for military strength, new markets, and culture superiority. And so let's take a quick look at each of these before we then move on into new content for today. The desire for military strength. We have Alfred Thayer Mahan, Admiral of the U.S. Navy, is going to write a book, The Influence of Sea Power on History. And he's going to say the strong countries, or the strongest countries in the world, are the ones that have large and powerful navies. America is going to respond by building up their Navy, their Great White Fleet, as you can see here. And by the time that we approach the 1900s, America is going to have the third largest Navy behind Great Britain and then also Japan. And so America is going to look to expand out, and we can see these acquiring naval bases around the globe. Think back to the map that we completed at the beginning of chapter 10 here of all these different island nations. Well, these island nations are important. If America is going to have a strong military presence, they need these islands so they can stop and refuel and continue to move across the oceans. Next, we have new markets. If you remember, America went through a little bit of a depression in the late 1800s. So about 1893, there was a panic that hit, and the United States economy plummeted. And people got really worried. What happens if America stops growing? What happens when the people in America stop buying American products? Well, people struggle. And so how do we prevent this from happening? Well, we look for new trading partners, and that new trading partner that America has their eye on is China. Remember, I said this a couple times already, but the Philippines are going to act as a stepping stone to get to China. And so as America looks to the west to get to China, we need the Philippines as a place to get there. Also, along the way, we see Hawaii and Cuba in the Caribbean are going to have sugar, and that'll be some resources that America won as well. If you look at our little diagram here, you can see the Panama Canal is in the middle of both desire for military strength and new markets, as the construction of the canal will be imperative to America quickly moving from one side to the other side of the coast, from the east coast to the west coast, without having to go all the way down around the southern tip of South America. And so really it's going to be an efficiency thing. If we want to be an efficient, strong power, we need to have the Panama Canal and this shortcut to speed that process up. And then finally, the last factor pushing American imperialism is culture superiority. Now, this is something we've been talking about, whether you knew it or not, since the beginning of the year, that Americans felt like we are the superior race. We are the better group of people, and we are going to impose our beliefs and thoughts, whether that's Christianity or our government with democracy, onto other people. And we can use our military to make that happen as well, because they can't stop us. It's the survival of the fittest, if you will, that we talked about in Chapter 7 with social Darwinism. As America is looking to expand and acquire new territory, one way they do it is through purchase. And so in the late 1860s, America is going to purchase Alaska from Russia. Now you can take a look at 2 cents per acre. This is a steal of a deal for America as a great way to grow and gain some of those natural resources. Now keep in mind, at the time, the American public knew very little of Russia, they knew very little of Alaska and didn't really know the valuable resources that existed up there. And so when this news story broke that America spent $7.2 million to buy some land that people didn't know about, it was criticized widely, often called Seward's Folly or Seward's Icebox. And it was only over a matter of time that people figured out how valuable this was to making America a strong country. All right, switching topics here, we want to talk about the newspaper and the news. If you've been paying attention to TV at all in the last year and a half here, you've heard this term fake news pop up quite frequently, and it's something that the White House claims is out there, that fake news is ruining credibility. Well, it's not a modern day concept of fake news, or that the news is out there pushing their own agenda. And so this, I don't know if I'd say gets its start, but really ramps up during the end of the 1800s into the 1900s, and it's going to culminate around this activity that, or this event that is the Spanish-American War. And so we'll take a look at these two gentlemen that are going to be on your study guide here. We have William Randolph Hearst and Joseph Pulitzer, both with competing newspapers in New York. And so they're competing to get subscribers, people to buy their newspapers. And how can they get people to buy their newspaper over their competitors? Well, they come up with this new style of journalism that is known as yellow journalism. exaggerated news to lure and enrage readers. Lure and enrage readers. You're trying to get people to buy your newspapers, and so what they do is they start to twist the news a little bit, and there's some biased reporting that takes place. Now, the name yellow journalism gets its definition from this cartoon that was started in the New York Journal. You can see the yellow kid here, hence yellow journalism. And so let's take a look at some of these characteristics of yellow journalism. We see scarce headlines, often in large print, and then the news stories themselves. Once you open up the magazine or flip the pages of the newspapers, there's very little news that really exists with this story. The use of lavish pictures or drawings, this is one of those things to lure people in because visually you're sucked in, oh, I want to see more about this story. We see fake interviews or misleading headlines to confuse the reader. Maybe you think it's going to be something, you buy the newspaper and you open it up, and then it's not really at all what you thought. Or then you have these pseudosciences that are going to then be used in news. And so what a pseudoscience is going to be, think like fortune tellers or astronomers would fall into this category of pseudosciences. People that are passed off as experts, but really there's no credibility behind their field of study to say that they are a science or they're valid in what they're saying. And then finally, and we see this in the Spanish-American War, this dramatic sympathy where you play up, hey, this person is being picked on or mistreated and something needs to be done to stop them. Now, where have you seen examples of yellow journalism in modern day time? Well, if you've gone shopping at Walmart like I have, and you've waited in the really long lines, you take a look around and you see the Inquirer. Right in that checkout line, you look to the left, you look to the right, and these magazines are sitting there, and they suck you in with pictures and headings as we see here on our screen. Now, if you know anything about Michelle Obama, she's a fitness nut. There's no way Michelle Obama now weighs 257 pounds. Or look at the flip side of that. Angelina Jolie, she doesn't weigh 83 pounds. These are fake pictures. They're tainted pictures to draw you in, to buy the magazine, to look over what's going on. Others examples of this, well, let's take a look at the one on the left here. Get past maybe the Al Gore being some sort of alien monster, and take a look at the top right. We have Bill Clinton here. It says, yes, I did them all, his jailhouse confessions. Well, yes, I did them all. What is that referring to? Is it his past, maybe sexual exploits with interns, and so talking about people that he's had affairs with? His jailhouse confession, last I knew, he's never been charged with a crime. Bill Clinton's never gone to prison or jail. And then below Bill it says, did he order the hit? So now we're enticing this idea of Bill Clinton is hiring hitmen to take out these people. What is the story really about? You don't know. You got to buy the magazine. You got to open up to find out. Looking over on the right, you see the Inquirer talking about Obama wiretapping Trump. And they choose certain pictures that are going to put Trump in maybe a positive light. And then you take a look at Obama wearing these headphones. It looks like he's maybe listening to these recorded these recordings that he's had at Trump Tower, whatever it's going to be. I would venture to guess the picture of Obama is probably at a UN meeting where somebody is then translating a foreign nationalist speaking about something. And then down below it says, U.S. spies tell all. Those are those fake experts that we often see in these yellow journalism stories. I would venture to guess that those people didn't really say anything, or if they said something, it was super vague and didn't really relate to the story, but they're twisting it that way to sell a newspaper. And so we see the press, if you will, turns out to be this monster that sends out all these evil spirits across the country, and they enrage the readers. They get people to tune in and watch or buy whatever it is they're trying to sell here. And so how does this relate to the Spanish-American War? Well, give me a moment. We'll get to that point. As we get into section 2 here, we're going to take a look at how Americans are going to have different opinions about Cuba and what they should do in Cuba. We want to identify the events, and that'll be really the goal of today, is identifying the events that are going to lead to the Spanish-American War. And then probably next time we'll get into the outcome and the results of the war. Let me introduce you to Jose Marti. As it says, he's a journalist, but really he's the leader of the Cuban rebel movement. We have Cuba as being controlled by Spain, which is an imperial power. They're the Atlantic Ocean away. And they're going to say they're kind of done with the Spanish rule, that they want to have the right to rule themselves, and the Spanish are then preventing that from happening. Now, why do Americans care about Cuba? Well, we've talked about Manifest Destiny and trying to expand out. Cuba is only 90 miles away from the coast of Florida, so it makes sense you would expand out and take over something near to you. You also have this idea of resources. Sugar is going to be something on Cuba as well as in Hawaii that American businessmen are going to have interest in. And so Americans will own sugar plantations in both Hawaii but also then Cuba here. And this rebellion or revolt that is taking place is potentially harming American business. And so they're going to say, hey, we need to do something. And then finally, there's this idea of independence. America didn't used to be America. It was the 13 colonies. We were an imperialist nation of Great Britain and the Crown. And eventually, we, the 13 colonies, decided that enough is enough, we want to break away. And so some Americans are going to be very sympathetic to the cause of the Cubans, saying, okay, it's probably time for them as well. And just like Great Britain was holding us back, Spain is holding them back as well. So we should support their efforts to revolt against them and start an independent nation. And so Jose Marti is going to be this rebel leader, and he's going to stir the people up to the point where the Spanish identify him, capture him, and because he's such a nuisance, they exile him to the United States. And so he spends some time in New York, and he's going to continue to write, but he's going to write and publish things in newspapers to get the Americans to side with the Cubans in their fight for freedom. Let me introduce you to Valeriano Weyler, also known as the Butcher by the American press. He was sent in to stop the rebellions and the guerrilla warfare that was taking place. It was his job to round people up that he thought were fighting against the Spanish Empire and put them into these concentration camps. That way they could keep an eye on them and kind of figure out who was fighting and who wasn't until the conflict was going to be resolved. Well, in these concentration camps, things were pretty poor. Living conditions were bad. People weren't getting enough food. And then all of a sudden there started to be these stories that were being sent out about what conditions were going to be, that the Spanish are poisoning these wells that people are drinking from, and so many of them are dying. There were even a story or two that were leaked out that the butcher here, for his own amusement, I guess, would take small children and then feed them to sharks and watch them. And, you know, that seems pretty ridiculous, but at the same time you hear that this guy is feeding small children to sharks, you're going to get upset and you're going to say something needs to be done. We need to investigate. And the American newspapers jumped all over this. William Randolph Hearst of the New York Journal is going to famously be quoted as saying, "You furnish the pictures and I'll furnish the war, because war sells. People are interested in this stuff." And so reporters are going to start going down to Cuba, and we see that these different pictures start to then come back. We see many malnourished, mistreated individuals being printed in the newspaper, and it's hard to turn a blind eye to this. If you've been watching TV and you see those commercials asking you to donate money on a monthly schedule to help, whether it's animals or people starving in Africa, you know, and they play some sad, soppy song behind it, you feel pretty bad, and you're like, okay, maybe I need to act. And it's kind of that same tactic to use here. Now, as you're looking at these pictures, are you questioning in your mind, do they look right? Do they look valid? Do they look real? And that's a tough question to answer. I don't know. I don't know if all of these pictures that I'm showing you are real or not, but I don't think that's necessarily the point. The point is, you're beginning to question and you're beginning to wonder, and you're saying, what the hell is going on in Cuba? We need to go down there and do something just for the sake of humanity. And then other pictures start to come out, and these ones, unfortunately, are real. And so we see over 200,000 Cuban civilians are going to die in about a 19-month span leading up to the Spanish-American War in the late 1900s. Or excuse me, in the late 1890s. And so here you have a journalist sitting on a pile of skull and bones. With all this going on, the newspapers are going to seize the opportunity to inflame or incite some sort of rebellion. And we do this through the Delome letter. And so what I want you to do is to pause this video and go back to Schoology, and I want you to read through the Delome letter. And as you're reading, I want you to answer here on Edpuzzle the question in orange. It's only about a page and a half long, but I want you to find out what's the thing that is going to upset American readers. Read carefully, as it's one brief excerpt, and I want you to insert that into Edpuzzle to see if you can't find what that excerpt is going to be. All right, did you find it? The Delome letter here is going to call our American president, William McKinley, a wussy. He says he's weak and he's a bitter for the admiration of the crowd, that he won't act unless the American people want him to do so, unless they plead him to do so. So he's spineless, he's gutless. And so what can McKinley do now that this foreign diplomat has called America, or the leader of the American people, a wuss? Well, McKinley is going to respond by sending the American ship, the USS Maine, down to the Havana harbor. Right, this is our strongest, best, newest battleship that we've then created. Now, the sending of this ship is going to act as a warning to the Spanish. It's kind of a keep talking and see what's going to happen. Maybe we will go to war. Maybe we will support the Cubans. Now, something interesting happens as the USS Maine is sitting in the Havana harbor. It blows up. On February 15th, and that's a date you'll want to know for our next activity, on February 15th, the USS Maine explodes. All right, moving on. We're going to take a look at how news is going to play a role here. And so what I want you to do is to go to Actively Learn, and there are some primary sources loaded up on Actively Learn. There are 9 of them. I want you to go through them and see how the press and the news and cartoons are going to how they're going to tell the story of the Spanish-American War.